Welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students, brought to you by the Union of Jewish Students of the UK and Ireland. I'm Samantha, the UJS sabbatical officer responsible for campaigns and inclusion. Today I am joined with two exciting guests. Firstly, we are joined by Matty Fisher, who is a former UJS sabbatical officer and the founder of Yalla. He is also a final year student at the University of Leeds. Thank you, Matty, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Samantha. As someone who has suffered from Crohn's disease for over 8 years, I'm delighted to join you all today to mark Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week, and thank UJS for joining into the Jews with IBD campaign in order to create greater awareness.
Thank you. We are also joined by Ollie Kay, a medical student at the University of East Anglia, who will also be talking about his experiences and journey with IBD. Welcome, Ollie, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very excited to talk about IBD and for National Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. I hope this helps a lot of people as well. I'm looking forward to it.
So to begin, for those who might not be familiar with the term IBD, could you explain what this is in a little bit more detail? Open to both of you.
Yeah, so IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, is an umbrella term for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. There's a few other small subtypes, but they're the main two. Essentially, it's an inflammatory condition of your digestive system. So Crohn's disease can affect your entire digestive system from your mouth all the way down to your bum, whereas ulcerative colitis just affects your colon, hence the name colitis. It causes ulcers and inflammation, and that comes with a whole range of symptoms, which we'll get onto, that can affect the gut, but also the rest of the body as well. And it is a chronic condition, so unfortunately there isn't a cure as of yet for IBD. So people are normally treated with medications most of the time. People have surgery, like myself, to try and control their symptoms. And yeah, that's a little bit about IBD.
What are some of the common misconceptions about IBD? As you mentioned, it's a chronic illness. So how do you address some of the misconceptions that occur when speaking about IBD and the symptoms?
Yeah, so with IBD, of course, there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, people listening to this might not even know what IBD is. So the main ones that I've come across, just from having IBD, is the main thing is age. I think a lot of people associate IBD with affecting older people, whereas IBD has, I think, what its peak incidence is in young people around the late teenagers, early 20s and 30s, so around our age as well. I mean, that's a very big misconception that it just affects older people. It can affect younger people. Babies, not as common, but it can still affect babies and younger children. So that's the first misconception. There's the misconception that it's just a bowel disease. I know it's in the name, it's inflammatory bowel disease, but your gut it links to absolutely everything in your body, your skin, your mental health, just your energy levels. I mean, it affects absolutely everything. So it's not just going to the toilet or not being able to go to the toilet. It's a lot more than that. And also on your social life, you might be scared to go out, just scared about your symptoms or people judging you. So it's a lot more than just a bowel disease, essentially. And yeah, I mean, some other ones is that, again, it is a bowel disease. So people think if you just eat healthily, you're going to be cured. And that's that. I wish that was the case. Otherwise, there wouldn't actually be any IBD with there. But food does have a massive role in IBD in managing the symptoms. But in terms of actually causing it and curing it, it unfortunately doesn't, because it's an autoimmune condition, it's inflammatory, it's a lot more complicated than that. And the other one is that it's not contagious. I can't give it to anyone. It's all part of your immune system, essentially, genetics and environment. So you can't catch IBD if you're speaking to me or in close proximity to someone with IBD. So there are a few misconceptions about IBD.
And on that, how does IBD typically manifest? Are there different types that people should be aware of? What symptoms to look out for?
Yeah, sure. So as I said at the start, IBD is that umbrella term for Crohn's disease, which probably most people have heard of. and ulcerative colitis. There's a few other types. I think the microscopic colitis. They're the main two. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, well, as of yet, a doctor, so I don't want to give the medical advice. But the main symptoms are it's normally a change in your bowel habits going on for a while. Something's not quite right with your bowel habits. You're having diarrhea or constipation. You may see blood in your stools. You may see some weight loss. You're feeling tired and fatigued. So a lot of these symptoms are they're not very specific. They could be a whole load of things. But normally when things aren't quite right with your bowels, you're very fatigued, and it's just not getting better. It's always a good sign to go and speak to a GP or speak to someone with medical advice. So that's how it usually manifests with people.
So both of you have various forms of IBD. I was wondering if you could both walk us through your IBD journey. So Matty, you mentioned that you were diagnosed 8 years ago with Crohn's. Could you talk us through that diagnosis, how it happened, and sort of the journey since then as well?
Sure. So I actually found out I had Crohn's basically out of the blue. I was actually going to a doctor for a blood test based off of allergies to test if I had certain allergies to different things. The blood test came back with high inflammation, which is not usually seen in an allergy test. So I was recommended to be tested out. I have a family history of IBD, so it was quite a good guess that I could be potentially suffering from it. So went through various tests, ultrasounds, MRIs, colonoscopies, stool samples, further blood tests, and all the tests came back to diagnose with Crohn's disease. So it was quite a shock because I didn't really expect it at the time. I just thought I was going to be allergic to something, and then to be uh, hit with the news about Crohn's, I felt my whole like life had gone in front of me. I felt like it was really going to impact my life. I thought, how am I going to tell my friends about this? How am I going to go to school? All these thoughts went through my head. It was quite a hard thing, especially at like 13 years old to find this out was extremely difficult. Um, and from that, I went through various treatments. I was on a liquid diet for 6 weeks, which then caused loads of questions at school, like, why are you not coming to the dining hall with us to get food at lunch? Questions like that. That didn't work. So then I went on to steroids. That also didn't work. And then I was on infusion called infliximab, which meant every Monday, every other month, I'd have to go to hospital for a day for infusion, to be infused with the medication. Thankfully, that worked for quite a few years, but it did hinder my life in the sense of having to plan around it, having to miss school, and various events because of it, because you just cannot reschedule it. Um, and it was very tough. Thankfully now, I'm in a better place. I think we'll go on to that a bit more later. Um, but originally getting diagnosed, it was a shock to the system. I didn't really tell anyone. It was very hard to come to terms with, um, which was my biggest mistake because what I've learned over time is telling people is the best thing you can do because each person that knows makes it that much easier to live with because they just want to support you and be there for you and help you through it.
I was wondering, Ollie, if you could maybe also talk a little bit about your experiences and sort of your diagnosis and what that was like, um, especially sort of the decision that you made to undergo surgery later on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can relate to Matty's story a lot. I mean, there's obviously similarities. There's obviously a lot of differences as well. So my journey up to diagnosis was I was diagnosed 5 years ago, just coming up to 5 years ago. I was in year 11, probably about September time, probably over the summer as well. Um, I was always very skinny, but I could see that I was losing a bit of weight. And I was having a bit of loose stools. That was really much it. It was just was going on for maybe 3 months, 4 months. Something just wasn't quite right. I just knew something wasn't quite right. It wasn't impacting my day-to-day life at all. I was still in school. Just came back from Maccabiah in Budapest, playing sport. So I went to the doctor, and they did some tests as well, blood tests, and came back, there was quite high inflammation. They did some further tests like the colonoscopy, where I was eventually diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is the other form of IBD to what Matty has. And as Matty said, it was a big shock. I was 15. I'm still very young. It was a big shock to the system. Didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what my life would be like. But when I was diagnosed, it wasn't really impacting my day-to-day life, as I said, too much. I was still going to school, still playing sport. But then as we're going to shortly after, my condition did deteriorate quite quickly. So I guess it was a blessing in disguise. I was diagnosed at that point. Obviously went through various medications, a whole ladder of more severe medications you can try, steroids and immunosuppressants, all these toxic drugs to just try and keep the inflammation at bay. But for me, they just weren't working at all. I was going in and out of hospitals. I was missing school, had these infusions, obviously being patient in hospital. So eventually, I didn't really have any other option but to take out the colon, which was causing all these issues. It was making me very, very ill, probably close to dying. And yeah, eventually had that removed 6 months after my diagnosis, which is relatively quick. Obviously, everyone's completely different with IBD. It's such a range of symptoms and diagnosis. Yeah, and then 6 months later, I had my colon removed. I was left with a stoma bag, which we'll get onto. I lived with that for 3 years, gave me back my life. I did pretty much everything I wanted to with it. I then had a reversal, which basically got rid of the stoma bag. But unfortunately, that didn't work out. So I had to have another surgery to go back to the stoma bag. So I've now got a permanent stoma bag for life, which for a lot of people be like, oh, that's awful. That's the end of the world. But for me, it's given me a second chance at life. So I don't regret anything. I wouldn't change anything. And that's a short version of my story of IBD.
And on that, I know that firstly, my perspective on IBD over time has changed. Originally, I thought, as I said, that my whole life had like gone beyond across my eyes. I wasn't going to be able to basically live a fulfilling life that I would wanted to. But over time, I've learned how to live with it and how to manage it and how to not let it really affect what I want to do. I'm interested to know if your perspective of IBD has changed over time as well, particularly before and after your various surgeries.
Yeah, definitely has. I was having to think about this. I think obviously when I was diagnosed, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anything about IBD. I didn't know anyone who had IBD. I did later find out people in my family have IBD, but it didn't affect their life really much at all. I didn't know anyone at least my age who had IBD at the time. So really, as time's gone on, I've learned a lot more about IBD and how it affects people's life. I think the main thing about my perspective is that you can have 1,000 problems in life, but if you've got a health problem, you've got one problem. So I think just my appreciation of health and just being healthy has just changed so much. I think as a young people, I think we just take that for granted a lot. I'm sure Matty, you can relate to that. When you are in hospital, you're unwell, you can't do things that for most people it's just another day. They don't really think about it. But when you have that health back, like we luckily have at the moment, I think it's your second chance at life. You just take everything, you appreciate things a lot more, and I think you've got a bit more motivation and resilience as well. So my perspective on that has also changed. That when you have a health problem, you've got one problem, no other problems.
I wondered, Matty, if you also wanted to sort of touch on how your perspective has changed over time, because you also mentioned that you definitely have a different perspective now, and some of the things that you wish that you knew when you were first diagnosed.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I've changed over time. I think the first one is um, when I first got diagnosed, I was embarrassed by it. I was scared by it. I was anxious to tell even my closest friends. I basically like hid behind it for quite a few months, and then only then told a few friends. And it wasn't until quite a few years later I actually started just speaking about it openly. And once I ended up speaking about it to people, people became a lot more, oh, that's why this, that's why you didn't come to the dining room with us. Like people didn't judge me for things I was doing in my life because of it, because they understood the reasoning behind it. And I think what that is one of the biggest things I wish I knew when I was diagnosed is to have those conversations and to be able to speak to people about it. Um, Still, throughout, um, obviously it affects like anxiety and stress um in my everyday life. Okay, I've developed because of inflammation. So actually my Crohn's is inactive right now, but because of inflammation I've got basically what's called a stricture uh in my bowel, which basically means like a narrowing. So bigger foods will be harder to digest and can cause blockages, which is what over the last couple of years I've had various issues with. um and that can be very anxious. If I think I've eaten one thing that is wrong, that could send me into an anxiety spiral of, oh no, am I gonna end up in hospital again? So my perspective has definitely changed because of the way I'm experiencing it. Luckily, my Crohn's isn't active at the moment, but I'm experiencing things as a result of the Crohn's inflammation that are causing more issues now. Um, but I think the biggest thing on my perspective has changed is to be open about it. I think over the last few years specifically, I think it's basically become part of my personality. I think I can't shut up about it, which some people now make fun of. But I think that's a good thing. I think it's better to have these conversations, better to be transparent about it. Um, because also you meet various people. Like I originally met Ollie through social media because we were both doing things on social media to raise awareness. And just having that community of people who are also going through it, have people to go to and discuss it, can be extremely helpful.
And again, this is a question directed at both of you, but what were some of those pivotal moments, sort of since your diagnosis to now, that have really shaped how you manage your conditions today? What are some of the things that you've done that didn't work that now you sort of know what to do instead, that might be useful for other people? But as you said, everyone is different when it comes to IBD.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I think the things that when I was diagnosed, it was obviously a game changing, it was a life changing moment. Um, I think just when I was diagnosed and this moment of my life's going to be changing, is am I going to be able to do things? Am I not? It was quite scary. It was a shock. Especially when I was going into surgery, it was even more of a shock. So I mean, whenever I do speak to people, it's always things will get better. I think with a chronic condition like IBD, things you can't just have a quick antibiotics and it's fixed after a week. It's chronic. There's no cure. But eventually there is going to be something that is going to work for you and it is going to control the symptoms enough that you can live, a fairly normal life and you can do things that you want. So a lot of people can take, I mean, decades to get their symptoms under control, or even just to get a diagnosis. And it's just such a range of symptoms and how it affects people's life. Everyone's got that individual journey with IBD. So I think that's probably my main point for that is that things will eventually work out, and I think luckily with medicine there's so many new treatments and hopefully there will be a cure. But I think I always say to people, eventually things will get better. It might not happen tomorrow, it might happen in a month, it might happen even a year, but they will get better eventually.
Yeah, and I think sort of having these conversations is definitely sort of that step to sort of encourage people, especially young people who have maybe just been diagnosed, that it's a journey that you take, which sort of brings me back to sort of both of your social medias and the fact that you both have been very active in campaigning about addressing and educating people about IBD, which is a really incredible thing for both of you to do, as students especially. So what was it that sort of inspired you? What was that initial moment where you said, you know what, I'm going to set up a social media platform, or I'm going to advocate and dedicate my campaigning to IBD awareness? I'll start with Matty and then we'll go on to Ollie.
Sure. I always wanted, quite a few years after being diagnosed, and I started telling people, I mean, I've always been a media person and wanted to create media, and I had the idea to make a documentary about my personal journey with Crohn's, and I never got around to doing it. And then when the first COVID-19 lockdown happened, I found I had a lot of free time, so I spent like the first month, 2 months of it just um filming my story, editing it. Luckily at the time I was running a YouTube channel where all the videos are now private because it's embarrassing. I had like hundreds of videos from when I was like 12 onwards. So I basically used those videos as like a progression to show how my condition deteriorated and then got better, to kind of visually show that. And I launched the documentary in 2020, which I made the Instagram account for that documentary. And then following the success of the documentary, I felt it's time to do more on social media. So I started doing more on social media. And then I went to university, and as things happen, you get very busy and you never get around to doing it um, until this year. It's something I wanted to do last year whilst working at UGS, but because of events of last year, never got round to having the time to do it. So returning to university this year, I felt this was the big project I wanted to kind of focus on this year and dedicate time to, um, which made me to like rebrand my account and kind of relaunch it and make it this more collaborative campaign called Jews of IBD. Because despite uh, Ashkenazi Jews being up to 4 times more likely to suffer from Crohn's or colitis, um, I find that the conversations around the community are lacking, and we don't really have that much uh, awareness about it in the community. Most people I've ever spoken to is the first person I've ever spoken to with it within the community. Yes, they're opening, they're happy to hear it, but I think go back to what I said earlier about being open to people about it. I think if people knew that people were talking about it, they'd be a lot more open. Like people at 13 when I was diagnosed to speaking about it. So it's a big campaign to try and basically increase awareness and increase conversations around the community, working with many people like Ollie to basically try and use our platform to raise awareness and work alongside various organizations like um, J Digest at Camp Simcha, and of course UJS, the Jewish News, currently Colitis UK, and others who will also join on as well. So I'm really thankful for all the support so far, and hopefully this can be a turning point um, in the community to continue increasing awareness and conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can relate to that, and I hope that the community just continues to increase, which just sort of leads on nicely to why I set up my social media about a similar time to you, Matty, around that COVID 19 time. Always have to mention COVID in one of these podcasts. Um, yeah, but COVID was when I was diagnosed, and then I had my stoma surgery in June 2020. And really, like Matty said, the first people or community that I saw that had IBD, that had gone through surgery and stoma surgery, was on social media. I think I went onto Instagram, typed in IBD, and then had a little scroll through in the hospital bed, and that's where I discovered this, amazing community of people that were sharing their stories. They were living their life. They were showing the challenges and the things they were doing in life. And I think that just really inspired me, and it just really motivated me when I was in hospital, when I thought I was the only one that was going through IBD, and I just thought things weren't going to get better. So when I did have surgery and I came out of surgery, I never really had a pre-thought to make social media. I think I just, I just I set one up. But the idea was that I wanted to have that same inspiration on other people, and I think with social media, with especially the IBD community, there's a big gap for young males, especially, and young people in general, even just the whole community, but especially for young males, so like myself and Matty's age. So I saw that that sort of gap in the market, if you like. It was really important, to put myself out there, because it's helped so many people, and I know it has. So that was the first reason to inspire other people, like I was inspired. It gave me that motivation. I think some other reasons that it's helped me accept my condition. Having those, just being more open about it, having those dialogues with people. And then people, when I went back to school, people are like, oh, that's why you're missing school. I can understand what you're going through now. Because like Matty said, when I was diagnosed, I didn't tell anyone at all. I'd make those excuses. It's a long story, or don't worry about it. People thought I had COVID, or it was not that time of year. But I was just making excuses. I wasn't telling anyone, and even my closest friends, what exactly was going on. But social media just gave me that platform to be more open and just accept my condition, because it can be accepting of a chronic condition that you're going to live with for the rest of your life is extremely difficult. And I think it's having those mechanisms to cope, whether that is speaking on social media or whether that's just getting on with your life, which probably most people do. But I think having people on social media, having that community, to show that you're not the only one suffering, and there is awareness, there's education around it. It is so important. But of course, everyone's got their different ways of coping with it. I'm sure if you speak to someone else with IBD or another chronic condition, they've got a completely different way of coping with it. So yeah, it's probably the main reasons why I set up my social media. And go follow it as well. The kid with the bag.
um, yeah, no, it's like incredible. Like social media is completely foreign to me, but I know that with every form of social media comes sort of that negativity attached to it that you can never sort of get rid of, however hard you try. How do you handle sort of any negative or people commenting misinformation? How do you try to manage and handle sort of those anonymous users, if I'm saying that right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had my fair few of this. I guess I have accumulated quite a big following on my Instagram and TikTok. So inevitably you are going to get nasty comments, ignorant comments. I don't get a lot, luckily, but there is a few. People just saying, why are you showing off? Why are you doing this? It's disgusting. Why are you showing your top or your stoma? Don't want to see this. But it is a minority. It's like 0.01% of all the comments. They're the ones that stick with you, unfortunately. And the way that I deal with it, I think, I mean, if it's like an ignorant comment, I do try and educate them. So I think a lot of the time people just don't know exactly what IBD is and bowel disease. So I do try and educate them, just explain. And normally people do understand, but if it is a nasty comment, just have to ignore it, and just keep doing the beneficial stuff that's going to help 100 or 1,000 times more people than that one nasty comment. So it is really difficult. I think the nasty comments, as I said, are the ones that stick with you, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if Matty, have you had any experience with that as well?
No, luckily, I don't think I've ever experienced sort of in these accounts any negative comments. Um, but I think on these accounts, it's a lot more out there. So probably more prone at the moment to negative comments like that. But I mean, it's something that is to be expected on social media, but it's something that's never easy to go through and experience.
Yeah, and I've watched some of your sort of TikToks and Instagram videos, and one thing that really stood out to me is sort of you go through sort of some of your everyday like routines, sharing like how you manage different things, which is really insightful, and it is a great educational tool for people who don't know what things are, who don't know what it is like to live with a stoma or to sort of have IBD. Um, how do you feel that social media has helped in breaking those stigmas around bowel disease? You sort of mentioned sort of helping the ignorant sort of commenters with more information, but have there been any memorable moments in which you have been aware that your platform has positively impacted people around you, but also other people who have just watched your content?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's why I keep posting. I think obviously I have done the campaigns and the posts and things for the media and things like that. But I think the points that stick with me the most and has the most impact is it's those direct messages with people, the one-on-one conversations. I think, of course, social media you can't put across, and as you said, you're trying to be as real as possible, but you can never show absolutely everything. You can never answer those individual questions for people. But I think when you actually have a conversation with someone, if they've got questions about their diagnosis or surgery or just anything around their condition, and you just speak to them on that, that personal level. You have that shared experience. I think it's a really special, bond you have, a relationship. And I think the benefit and the impact that has on people is really, really powerful. Having other patients as well as the medical support as well, I think it's really, really powerful. So that's probably the most impact. You can have all the posts and BBC articles, but I think having those one-on-one conversations, I think, is the most impactful thing that I've experienced from my social media, at least.
Matty, I have a question because obviously you've done a lot of work with launching Jews with IBD and making sure that students are aware of it. Why do you think this campaign is so important for Jewish students? And how can Jewish organisations like UJS continue to support awareness and provide resources for individuals dealing with IBD?
Yeah, so as I said, very thankful to you, Jess, for joining on the campaign. When I started talking to people about putting this big project together, my first starting point was to focus on young people and students because I think, firstly, that's where a lot of young people need those conversations and feel quite um, alone in them, but also we know that for many diseases, people don't go get tested out. People just let symptoms slide, especially in the student space. And for me, being diagnosed at 13, despite being so hard, that's the best thing to have happened because it allowed me to get on meds sooner and try and prevent. And thank God, so far I've been able to prevent having surgery, which might not have been the case if I got diagnosed 4 years later. We don't know; it's hard to predict. So part of the campaign is to try and make people more aware of the symptoms, make people more aware about what Crohn's and colitis are. So if that they are experiencing the symptom, even if it's just a tummy ache, but they still just get it tested out, because that early diagnosis can be really vital in their journey and make it 10 times better. But also providing that space for support. So we've created a network for young people suffering from IBD, which is basically used as a group chat, and hopefully in the future we'll have some events as well where everyone can come together. We can ask each other for advice if we're moving medications. Just the other day, someone was moving to a different medication, asked in the group chat if anyone else had been on it, and asked for advice on it, asked about side effects, and it really helps having that community there to ask questions to and know that someone else has gone through it as well. And finally, I think this idea of the communication around the community. So, very excitingly, going to be hosting at Limud in a few weeks' time a panel where various young people suffering from IBD are going to be speaking about their experiences. I think that's one of the first times IBD will be spoken in a communal setting, which I hope is going to be the start of conversations going on in the community and just more communal discourse around it, which I think just will make people more aware of the conditions of people suffering it and therefore being more open and welcoming to people who do, but also at the same time, those who might have symptoms getting tested earlier, which can really help them. And when they are, and if they do get diagnosed, there's that community there to bring them on board.
So you've talked about sort of young students and making sure, and young people and making sure that, they're getting tested early, making sure that they're aware of the symptoms. But what are some specific challenges that you feel are unique to young people, especially students who are living with IBD or have a stoma, especially in those educational or social settings that you mentioned?
Yeah, but Matty, you gonna go? Sure. Sure. Yeah. So as young people, I think having an invisible condition like IBD, obviously there's many other conditions, does come with that, misjudgment, there's misconceptions, there's that lack of understanding towards people that have an invisible condition like IBD. So I think it can be very, very difficult. I think just those. It's always they say that not all disabilities are visible. I think that's really important to emphasise. So I think young people do have a lot of challenges in that sense. Fitting in with social situations, There might be reasons you might not be able to go out because of symptoms, or you just don't want to eat things or drink things. You might be more fatigued, so you need to stay in. Medications, going to hospital, just managing your general life on top of your condition is always just another challenge that young people have to face, on top of general young people life. So I think that's probably the main challenge that I can think of. There's obviously a lot more, but just that stigma of young people should always be healthy, and there's always that conception that you look healthy, so you're fine. When really there is a lot of things that are challenging for someone with IBD. So I think just having that education and that understanding, which is why these podcasts and community and awareness is so important, so people have that understanding of what young people might be going through, even if they don't appear to be going through something. So that's probably the main point for that. I don't know if Matty, you've got other challenges you faced.
Yeah, I think just to add, I echo everything Ollie said. I think just to add, I think in specifically the specific challenges facing young people and specifically students, student life is incredibly intense. It's socials all the time, high intensity, high workloads. It's very much more intense than the workplace where you have that structure. You have those days off which you can take. You can work from home if you need to. It's much harder to make those adaptations. For example, if you're having a flare up or you're not feeling great and you just need to and you want to stay at home for the day, you're first you might have FOMO from social events going on campus, with your course mates or with societies you're part of, but also um, some lectures aren't online. You can't see them online, or that in-person lecture is much better for you to learn, or it really stops you from working on an essay you need to do. So it really can impact your studies. Whereas I feel that in the workplace, it's a lot easier to manage, and you can really just take that time out. And there's a lot more things in place.
I'm going to move on to sort of, you mentioned that, before you were diagnosed, you were at Maccabea, which is sport, right? Yeah, perfect. So I was wondering sort of, and you've continued to participate in sport since your diagnosis, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how sport has sort of contributed to sort of managing both sort of any IBD symptoms that you might have, but also your mental health as well.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, sport's been a massive part of managing my condition physically and mentally. I think physically, just keeping fit and keeping in the best physical shape you can is always going to be beneficial to managing a chronic condition. If your body's got enough muscle, it's got enough energy, its bones are strong, it just gives you a better quality of life on top of inflammatory bowel disease. But probably more importantly is that mental side of sport. I think it always gave me, when I was actually physically able to play sport, it always gave me that outlook. I was always able to just forget about not just IBD, but just general stresses in life, and just switching off and having that moment just to focus on the sport. And I think another thing with sport is that I've always tried to show that despite having IBD, I know it's different for everyone, but I always try and advocate that you can do what you want with IBD, obviously with medical advice and with all the doctors' green lights. But I think it's not the end of the world to have a stoma. It's not the end of the world to have IBD. I've always tried to show that I play futsal. I've been able to play on Maccabea. I've also represented England for futsal. I've been travelling playing futsal for England with a stoma bag and with IBD. So I've always tried to share that on Instagram and TikTok just to inspire other people, through sport, that it's not the end of the world to have a stoma bag, even if it is life changing, but it's not the end of the world. And of course, that mental side of sport is so important. So yeah, sports is still a massive part of my life. Hopefully, it will be. So yeah, that's a bit about impact of sport.
What role do open conversations like this and sort of just education and awareness play in reducing that embarrassment or isolation for people who might have IBD when they're initially diagnosed and not really knowing sort of what it is about?
Sure, I can take this question. Um, I think the conversations and education are basically vital in this. I think for me personally, as I said earlier, if I didn't have those conversations earlier on, um, I think I would have been way worse. For the first 6 months when I basically didn't tell anyone, when I was on that liquid diet and having to make excuses why I wasn't going to get lunch with people, why I wasn't eating properly, why I was always just drinking these nutrition drinks all of a sudden when it wasn't really my thing beforehand. I wasn't really one of the like health people. Um, it would have just made my life so much better. Um, so I think the number one thing is are those open conversations and just being open to speaking to people. What can I do to help you? Is there anything I can do? Um, for example, like at university, if you know someone has Crohn's and you're in a lecture with them and they don't shop one day, maybe check in on them, make sure they're feeling all right. If not, maybe like you catch them up on what was said in the lecture or um, update them when they're feeling a bit better. Um, or maybe they're feeling too unwell that they can't leave the house, but they need food or they need something, going to the shops for them. Just having those there's so many different things, but I think just having those conversations and speaking to people can really help. Um, I certainly felt before I told people that I would be embarrassed, and actually after telling people, it's even better. Like I'm not embarrassed one bit by it, and that whole anxiety in my head about being embarrassed is gone. So I think it's not something to be embarrassed about. It feels embarrassing because of the nature of what Crohn's and colitis is. But people are mature. People understand this, and from my experience, having those conversations is the best thing to do because otherwise there will be those rumors and those jokes about why you're doing this, why you're doing that. But but people aren't going to argue with medicine. So speak to them about what you're going through, and that would be my biggest advice.
Ollie, is there anything you want to add to that sort of question?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Matty. Having those open conversations with close friends is so important. I wish I did it earlier. It took me 6, 7 months, or even after I started posting on social media, um, to have those open conversations. I think because it helps not just you accept your condition, but also people to understand, what challenges you individually face. As Matty said in some examples, but I think on another side, I think before diagnosis, having those open conversations with people you trust, whether that's a friend, a parent, guardian, if you are having something's not quite right symptoms wise, to just go and get it checked out from a doctor, not to suffer in silence, not to just say it's going to get better, because as we have said before, the earlier you get it treated, the earlier you can get onto medications, the earlier you can get your symptoms managed and reducing chances of complications, and it can even save your life in some instances. Most of the times it's normally nothing, but it's always better to be safer than sorry. So having those conversations with people you trust. If you do have symptoms, please do speak to someone as well.
And finally, a question for both of you again. What is one piece of advice that you would share with someone who has IBD, but also somebody who is just a friend who wants to know more? And what are you hopeful for about the future? So a 3-in-1 question to end things off.
Sure. I'm happy to go first and give Ollie time to think through them. So in terms of one piece of advice to someone who has IBD, the best thing for me has been being open with people and speaking about it. That gives you that community of support, and just speaking to people about it really can help you through it, even in like the toughest of times, and can also help you deal with anxiety or stress you may have from starting new medications or treatments as a result. And it was one piece of advice to someone who doesn't
Yeah,
have to a friend. Um, I think it's just being there. Um, just being there for your friend. It's looking out for them if they're looking a bit tired or don't see themselves or not eating as they do normally. I think it's just checking in on them, seeing if there's anything you can do to help or um, to help them through it. Um, and finally, always hopes for the future. Um, I mean, it would be amazing one day to get to have a cure for it to really save people, but I think we're quite far off that. And also, I mean, for me personally, I think it would be for Ollie as well. A cure at this point wouldn't help me personally because I've got this permanent stricture now as a result of Crohn's. Um, but I think just I'm hopeful about research going forward. I've heard about various research and treatments in development. I think it can really help even improve even more. The treatments we have at the moment are quite good, but I think the treatments that are in development could really help going forward and can help the experience. And I'm also sorry, one more. I'm also hopeful about the future in the community. I think this is a good example of the start we're making and having these conversations in the community. I think it's only going to increase from here, and I think the the awareness is going to build up, and I think it'll make the Jewish community an even better place to live with for someone who suffers from IBD.
And Ollie, any final sort of words, advice for someone who has IBD, advice for a friend who wants to help, and your hopes for the future?
Yeah, sure. I think, as Matty said, I'll definitely give that advice to people as well. I think quite a specific bit of advice is someone with IBD is just to have someone that you trust, someone that you can, I guess, rely on in a way that, when you are unwell, there's someone that you can speak to, someone that pick up the food, pick up the medications, so someone that's there for you. I think it's really important to have that support. I know it sounds cliche, but if I didn't have that support, I don't know if my management would have been the same, physically and mentally. But just having someone you can trust and you can always call upon, I think is really important. Um, and also, I think in terms of stoma surgery, which is I've been through as well, I always say to people, it's never the end of the world having stoma surgery. And when I was first told I might have to have stoma surgery, I started crying in front of the nurse. I thought my life was over. I thought I was never going to take sport again. But really, it gave me a second chance at life. It's not perfect, of course. It's not cure. It's got its challenges, but the quality of life after surgery is, I would definitely take it over where it was before. Being in hospital, medications, I probably would have died. So yeah, it's not the end of the world to have stoma surgery. It's not the end of the world to have IBD. And then advice to a friend, I think, would be, as Matty said, I think just being understanding, being empathetic, just not being judgmental, and really just being there for them. I think just being a friend as you would for anyone else, really. I don't see why it would be any different. But I think just having that understanding if they can't do something, if they're unwell or they just don't want to, because there is a valid reason for that. And I think for the future, I think, as Matty said as well, a cure would be brilliant, but it's quite bittersweet in a way. I've already had my colon removed, so there's nothing to be cured as well. But it is exciting. There is a lot of research. Obviously, I'm in the medical field doing medicine, and there has been research coming out about potentially cures. There's always new treatments as well. Hopefully, we can find out the exact causes, so people don't always have to go through all these medications for years and years. They can get put on a treatment. Hopefully, when they're diagnosed, because a lot of the times it's just a roulette. It's a lottery of what medications you're going to be on, which one's going to work for you. Like the first one you take might work, but then like for me or for Matty, it can be several medications, surgery even, to actually get your symptoms under control. So having something where you don't have to go through that ladder of medications would be great as well. Yeah, but it is exciting about all the research, and hopefully with all these new communities and things, the education around IBD and the stigma as well could be hopefully cut off completely. That's obviously a very hard task, but just as time goes on, the stigma around talking about bowel disease and bowel symptoms can hopefully be just like talking about you've got a bad knee or a bad ear infection as well. So I think that's what I'm hoping for in the future with IBD.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. A big thank you to Ollie and Matty for joining us today to raise awareness about IBD and to break down any stigmas and raising that awareness.
If anything in this podcast or events on campus have been triggering, don't forget that UJS's 24/7 dedicated welfare support line is open. You can call UJS on 0207 424 3281 to speak to one of our experienced staff or volunteers.
Don't forget to tune in next time to hear more incredible stories and meet some amazing people on Yalla. But for now, that's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
I'll see you on campus soon.